As always, thankful to be able to be here. Thankful to be able to be with people that I have a relationship with and that we can join together in song and prayer. Good. In song and in prayer and in worship to God, and do so in spirit and in truth. Do so with the right mindset and do so collectively. And it is a means of us sacrificing to God and doing so together. And it's one of the ways that we can fellowship one another and that we can edify one another, we can encourage one another. So as a continuation of our theme of the gospel and our culture, we are learning about our culture and seeing how that is different from the gospel. And not only to learn these things to be social critics, not only so that we can, or not so that we can, write a book and say how smart we are and how we can see how things are going and where things are going to go, but rather for us to take the gospel message to the world and do so in a way that can help the gospel make sense to people, to help it make sense to their minds and help it to resonate in a way that resonates with them individually and collectively. We do understand that the gospel has not and does not change, but there are different aspects of the gospel, and we're identifying those things and contrasting it to our culture. And I want to begin our thought on this morning to show us that our culture is not a lost cause. Our world is not a lost cause. It's not in a state where we can just say, you know what, there is no turning back from this. I don't believe that that's the case. And I don't believe that the Bible teaches us that that should be our attitude. As a matter of fact, we think about the parable of the sower. And the Bible shows us that the sower casts seeds everywhere. He didn't see, that's thorny ground, I'm not going to throw it there. Well, that's stony ground, I'm not going to throw it there. It shows us that he just casts his seeds, and he casts his seeds everywhere. And how that soil managed that seed, that was on the soil. But ultimately, the sower, he cast his seed everywhere. And we don't want to have this attitude, well, we don't want to waste the gospel on anybody. That should not be our attitude. We ought to be able to just cast and see what happens and see where it goes. And honestly, everybody in this world is not all bad. Everybody in this world is not all bad. I'm reminded of Jesus whenever he went to the man who had many demons in him. The man's name was Legion. And he had a lot of things going on. He had many demons that he was fighting, and that was causing him to behave in that way. And I want to make the point that some people are simply just facing a lot. Some people are just going through a lot of stuff. And let's think about this for just a second. Michael brought up 1 John chapter 3 and verse number 4, with sin being a transgression of the law. And that is absolutely true. And think about this in contrast to the law of God. In Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse number 24, God or Moses would tell the children of Israel that God did not just give these commands for just laughs and giggles. It wasn't just for, God had nothing else to do. It says that he gave them those commands and the statutes and say for their good always. And we see in 1 Timothy chapter 1 and verse number 8, I believe it is, where Paul would say that the law is good if a man use it lawfully. Sin, being a transgression of the law, is not just the transgression of the law. Sin is going away from what God has shown us to be good. And sin always leads to death. That is both physical and spiritual. That's that Romans chapter 6 and verse number 23 you brought up. But you look 2 verses prior, Romans chapter 6 and verse number 21, Paul would ask a rhetorical question, what fruit did you have in those things that you're now ashamed? The end of those things is death. And so sin is not only a thing that says, okay, you transgress God's law, but sin makes it to where our lives are more difficult. It makes it to where our lives are not as God had designed us to have them. And it makes it to where we have a difficult time living. And over a long practice of living in sin and doing these things, Romans chapter 6 and verse number, I believe it's 8, no, Romans chapter 6 verse number 12, we call sin reigning in your mortal body. Sin becoming a king over someone's life. What happens when sin is king over someone's life? Their lives become very hard. The way they think is not proper. Their relationships become difficult. Their guidance is off. And it makes it to where things just get hard. And I want to make this case that people in the world in our culture, people that we see that sin is reigning in their lives, these people are having a hard time. Broken relationships have become so common. It's very sad. You don't think that those people struggle with evil thoughts of their broken relationships? We have people in economic distress. It's not getting any easier. It's not getting any cheaper. You don't think that those people have thoughts and temptations of lying and stealing to get ahead financially and economically? Some of these kids, their parental guidance is TikTok and Instagram. You don't think that leads to problems? That leads to just overall confusion? You swipe on one video, they say, don't eat eggs. Eggs are bad for you. You swipe the next video, eggs are the best thing for you in the world. That's how it goes. And it just leads to just confusion, and then they take those things into life and say, well, I saw a TikTok video on it. And we laugh, but that's really people's parental guidance. Some kids, that's their guidance. You don't think that leads to problems? You don't think that leads to hardships? Some of these jobs and sometimes life is stressful on us. You got the employer just putting their finger down on the employee because their employer is putting their thumb on them and their employer is putting the thumb on them. And so now it just leads to people just being stressed out of their minds. No wonder why some people say, I just want a weekend where I can just forget my problems and numb it all. I'm not condoning any of those things. I'm just making the point. Jesus asked Legion, what is your name? He cared about this individual. He reached out to this individual, and ultimately, we know the story goes, he helped to heal that person. That's, I believe, our culture. Our culture is driven by sin. And sin is reigning in their bodies, and it's becoming a king over their lives, and it's making it difficult. And when people face difficulty, sometimes these morals and these goodwill, it goes out the window. So I think we can be there, we can help to be there for our culture. And so what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about stinginess. We're going to talk about stinginess and selfishness. And I believe that our culture is very stingy, but I think it's for a reason. I think our culture is stingy because the way we view people around us. The way we view people around us is not like it once was sometimes. In previous societies, like villages, small and tight-knit communities, you typically had to work and, your livelihood depended on the people that were in close proximity to you. But nowadays, we've become very individualistic and very independent that it's no longer, that's neighbor John, I know his wife Jana, I know their kid, our kids grow up together, I know his interest, I know everything about him, I can see and tell when he's struggling. It's no longer like that. Now it's just, they live in apartment 2B and I live in apartment 1B. And honestly, if we're being honest, some of us, I'm guilty of this, I don't know my neighbors. I know one. Yeah, I know one. We live in these societies, especially with larger cities, and, spread out, transportation is easy. So now someone can say, I'm just going to drive an hour and a half to go be with people I want to be with. Instead of, getting to know the people that are around me, how in times past that was necessary. And so what I think that has caused is it's made us to see people not necessarily as people that we know. They're just people that live over there. They're just people that are great in the grocery store. They're just people that we see. We don't always see people as we see ourselves, as people with background, with history, with this life of experience. And sometimes that causes us to not have a feeling of generosity. And it makes it to where we think, well, I need it more than they do. Or we just simply are ignorant of what they're going through. And so it doesn't move us to want to do something for these people. Another thing is our resources sometimes are so stretched that we can't even afford sometimes to give to people. We were talking about life insurance the other day, And I was like, man, some people cannot afford to die. Dying is expensive. And I believe that's the same thing with being generous. Sometimes we're like, you know what, I don't know how things are going to turn out. There's uncertainty. I'm putting this in an emergency fund. Sometimes we feel like our resources are so stretched that we cannot afford to give to people. And the culture tells us, take care of yours. Just take care of yours. Don't worry about anybody else. Another thing, scams. Scams are so prevalent. We see homeless people. What is our immediate thought? If we give them money, what are they going to spend it on? Drugs, alcohol, their addictions. And it's probably true. Remember the whole the BLM organization when they were soliciting funds to help further their cause, but what did they end up spending it on? Houses, their own things. Just corruption goes on. Scams go on. Then people are like, you know, I'm not going to give to anybody anyway. Now, if they're going to do it with that, if they're going to do that with it, that's very prevalent. And what has happened is people are now jaded. I'm not giving to that person. I don't know what they're going to do with it. And then you have another thing. Do you really need this? And now we have it to where people don't even know how to take gifts. You give something to somebody, they say, so what do you want from me? What are the strings that are attached to it? What are you trying to get at? Why are you being so generous? Why are you being so nice? All that is a result of our culture just being selfish and our culture being stingy. And now giving is considered something that's kind of weird to do. It might be nice, but it's not really like a requirement. It's just, oh, okay, you must have a little bit extra. It always comes out of the abundance. It's never a sacrifice of self to say, you know what, I'm going to go without in this thing that I want for your benefit. Now, we can look at that and be very discouraged, but I see that as a very, very great opportunity for the church. I see it as a great opportunity for us. Consider Romans chapter 12. Look over me at Romans chapter 12. Our culture has this mindset, and I believe that creates a great opportunity for us as Christians that are trying to make an impact. Look at Romans chapter 12. Look at me in verse number 20. It says, therefore, this is quoting from a proverb, therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing, thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Now this is an odd statement, heaping coals of fire on his head. What is this making reference to? It's making reference to whenever they would try to mix metals and soften up metals to create like a weapon or some sort of tool. They would have to heat it up and soften and melt the metal, put it in a mold, and put it together. And how you heat things up is you add coals to it. You add fire to it. You make it hotter. And the reference here is adding coals to metal softens it up. Adding heat to metal softens it up. And so the reference here is whenever you do good to someone that is your enemy, it softens them up. It works on their mind because there's a understanding, I'm not good to this person, but this person is good to me. And now it makes them become softer. It makes it become easier to entreat. And now you have Romans chapter 2 and verse number 4, where it talks about the goodness of God leading people to repentance. Why? Because God's goodness is an experience that someone cannot deny. God is good. Then why am I behaving this way? Why am I thinking this way? It causes people to think. And so, if our culture is not used to being given things and not used to people sacrificing, guess what happens whenever we show the goodness of God? Guess what happens when we begin to extend God's kindness to others? It begins to make an impact because it's not as common. And so the goal of this lesson is I want us to have a feeling and a desire to show kindness, to give. And we're going to look at that in 2 Corinthians chapter 8. 2 Corinthians chapter 8. And we recognize that an aspect of the gospel is God giving. And not only God giving out of his abundance, but we see God making a complete sacrifice. We're going to start in verse number 1. And here in the context, this is Paul's second letter to Corinth. And he is talking about the giving of the Macedonian brethren. And he wants to encourage the Corinthian brethren to do the same, to give of their financial means to help brethren for a purpose, to help people. And he shows the Macedonian brethren, but there's something in here that he makes a correlation to the gospel. We're going to start in verse number 3. It says, "For to their power I bear record, yea, and beyond their power, they were willing of themselves, praying us with much entreaty that we would receive the gift and take upon us the fellowship of the ministering to the saints. And this they did, not as we hoped, but first, look what they did. They gave of their own selves to the Lord, and unto us by the will of God." First off, if we're going to be giving charitable people, we have to give ourselves first to the Lord. We have to dedicate ourselves first to the Lord. Look at verse number 6. "Insomuch that we desire Titus, that as he had begun, so he would also finish in you the same grace also. Therefore, as you abound in everything," that's as you increase, as you get better, "in faith, in utterance, and knowledge, and in diligence, and in your love to us, see that you abound in this grace also." Paul is telling them, increase in your charitable giving. But don't just increase in your giving. You see, many American congregations, this is across all religions, a lot of it is about money. And they will preach and preach and preach and tell the people, we need to give, you need to send your tithing in, send the money in. During COVID, it was very interesting whenever congregations weren't assembling, they said, hey, make sure you still send your check in. Just mail it. There's a drop box. You don't have to come to services, just drop your check off. You don't think people recognize what they were in it for, really? But he said, increase in your giving, but don't just increase in your giving. Increase in your faith. Increase in your utterance, in your words, in your ability to articulate. Increase in your knowledge, as Baker was talking about during Bible class. Increase in your diligence, in your forwardness, in your intent and your motive and your action. Increase in your love to us. Increase in all these things. Get better at it. We were talking last night that we can get better at our worship services. That's possible. It's possible for us to get better at our prayers. It's possible for us to get better at our singing. We have entire schools dedicated to preaching so that men can become well-equipped and become proficient in the skill. So why can't we just say, you know what? Let's try to get better at our singing. Let's try to get better at our prayers. Let's try to be better about whenever we're remembering the Lord's death. And of course, we want to increase in our giving as well as we prosper. But there's something to think about. We can get better at this. And I believe God is pleased whenever we put in the effort to get better. Look at me in verse number 8. He said, "I speak not by commandment, but by occasion of the forwardness of others, and to prove the sincerity of your love." Look at verse number 9. This is where we want to hang out. Look at the correlation and what Paul uses to appeal, to ask them to give. It says, "For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, that ye through his poverty might be rich." We see these movies talking about someone's come-up story, where they have a social network talking about Mark Zuckerberg, his come-up. All these different people, how they started from nothing. They started from the garage. Amazon started from a garage, and now look at it. There's a come-up story. And usually that goes, someone started off dirt poor. They didn't have anything. And they, through their intelligence, through their luck, through their wit, they were able to climb the ranks and eventually become something great. Amass a lot of wealth. That's not Jesus' come-up story. He said Jesus was rich. Did Jesus have a Ferrari? Did Jesus have a mansion? No. But he's making the point of Jesus was in heaven. Jesus had a certain status. And when we think about wealth, wealth is not just the amount of money. Wealth is status. There's a sense of comfort. There's a sense of flexibility to do whatever you want. Yeah, if I want to do this, I'm just going to do it. I have the money. I have the resources. I have all these things. And it says that Jesus gave all that up. He became poor. He put on the form of a servant. He came and he ministered to other people. He gave up the comfort. He gave up the status. We'll see in Hebrews chapter 12. He despised the shame. He gave all that up. And for our sakes, he became poor so that the people that are poor, us, can through his poverty become rich. So that we can have an opportunity to be with God in heaven, where he was, and he did that by his poverty. So that we can have an opportunity to have a better life and to live the best life possible as he has, even while we were impoverished, even while we had need. And here Paul is making the point, that's what Jesus did. That's a part of the gospel. And he is asking them and pleading them, hey, you can sacrifice for other people because Jesus sacrificed for you. And not only did Jesus sacrifice, he sacrificed a lot. God didn't say, you know what, I got a couple extra dollars, here you go. He gave up everything. And he gave up everything so that we can be rich. Look in chapter 9. Look at chapter 9. Chapter 9, start me in verse number 12. It says, for the administration of this service not only supplies the wants of the saints, but is abundant also by many thanksgivings unto God. Whilst by the experiment of this ministration, look what they do. They glorify God for your professed subjection unto the gospel of Christ. Here he's making the point that if you say, profess, that's the word, subjection, that you're obedient to the gospel of Christ. If you confess, I am obedient to the gospel of Christ, look how they see that. Through your giving. Through your helping them. Through giving of your monetary things to help somebody else. And it says, and for your liberal distribution unto them and to all men. When we talk about obedience to the gospel, replicating what God has done for us, this is also included. Jesus was rich. He sacrificed. He became poor so that we can become rich. And so the argument here is, if Jesus can do that for you, you can do that for your brother. And I want to make an even bigger outside point. If God can do that for us while we were sinners, why can't we do that for our culture? Why can't we do that for those who are also in sin? And help them realize that I want to sacrifice for you because you're made in God's image. I'm not going to get this coffee, or I'm not going to get this meal, and instead of me going out to eat, I'm going to give this to you for something that you need. It demonstrates a self-sacrifice, and our culture is so detached from sacrifice. And I believe that is one of the reasons why we are very, very selfish, is because we can't sometimes understand, but you want me to go without? You want me to, I work for this money. You want me to not get what I want for somebody else? Jesus did it. And God sacrificed for us. But this goes a bit deeper. This is the second point. This goes a bit deeper. Look over me in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. Not only should we be willing to sacrifice and give, but we have to be able to give of something that is deeper than money. Look at 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, starting with me in verse number 4. It says, but as we were allowed of God to be put in the trust with the gospel, even so we speak, not as pleasing men, but God which tries our hearts. For neither at any time use we flattering words, as you know, nor a cloak of covetousness, God is witness. Neither of men sought we glory, neither of you, nor yet of others. We might have been burdensome as the apostles of Christ. But we were gentle among you, even as a nurse cherisheth her children. Paul is making the point, this is how we came to you. We didn't come to you just using all these nice words or being covetous and trying to subvert you for your money. He said we didn't do any of that. But we were gentle among you. Look at verse number 8. It says, so being affectionately desirous of you, we were willing to have imparted unto you not the gospel of God only, but our own souls. Why? Because you were dear unto us. Brethren, there are some people that they'll teach you the gospel, but don't ask them to do anything else. Don't ask me to come over to your house and do something for you. Don't ask me to sacrifice something of myself for you. I'll teach you the gospel, but don't ask me to come and help you move. Here Paul saying, we didn't just teach you and say, all right, you're on your own. But he said, we gave of our own selves. We were willing to give literally of ourselves. And I want to make the point that God has done this as well. You think about Isaiah chapter 53 and verse number 1, where there we learn, it would talk about who has believed our report, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed. The New Testament demonstrates that the arm of the Lord is Jesus. We come over to John chapter 1 and verse number 14, where there we learn that the Word became flesh. And it says, he dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. Now you compare that to John chapter 1 and verse number 6. There it's talking about John the Baptist. And in John chapter 1 and verse number 6, it would say that there came a man sent from God, whose name was John. Now compare that to John chapter 1 and verse number 14. This is something completely different. In John 1:14, we have the Word of God putting on flesh. We have the Word of God, it says it dwelt among us. It was a funny thing. It was like, is Kamala going to go to the border? Right? Oftentimes, people that are high up, they don't go down there. I'm not going down there. No, I'll do that. Because they don't want to get their hands dirty. But here it said that the Word came and he dwelt among us. Jesus came down and he got his hands dirty with people. That's very different. Then you go to 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse number 24. Now we see Christ is the power of God and he's the wisdom of God. These are literally extensions. This is God. He's coming in the flesh. This is very, very powerful. And so, what does this all come like to? You go to Ephesians chapter 5. Get Ephesians chapter 5 and read verse number 2. Christ's sacrifice was not just any old sacrifice. It was not just some random bull out in the field that, okay, he looks good, let's go and kill him. Christ's sacrifice was literally God sacrificing of himself. Read Ephesians chapter 5, verse number 2.
And walk in love as Christ also loved us and gave himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling aroma.
You have God literally giving of himself. Literally giving of himself and sacrificing everything. Giving up everything to come and sacrifice for people that were alien towards him. And my point here is, can we not do that for others? Can we not do that for one another? And can we not show our culture and our world, hey, I am willing to sacrifice what I want for you. It makes an impact. But Jesus not only gave of himself in the sacrifice, look with me in Mark chapter 5. Mark chapter 5. This is something I want to submit to us. I believe Jesus also gave of himself when he was interacting with people. Mark chapter 5. Look at me in verse number 28. It says, for she said, if I may touch but his clothes, I shall be whole. And straightway the fountain of her blood was dried up. And she felt in her body that she was healed of that plague. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself, King James would put virtue. Your New King James would say power. That's a better translation. Power had gone out of him, turned him about in the press and said, who touched my clothes? Why is it significant? Look over in Mark chapter 14. Mark chapter 14, Jesus healing, and it says he felt power go out from him. He felt power go out from him. Mark chapter 14, look at verse number 62. Starting 61, he said, "But he held his peace and answered nothing. Again the high priest asked him and said to him, Art thou the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am. And ye shall see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of" what? Power. God is the ultimate source of power. And we have Jesus, when healing, it says he felt power leave from him. And that power went into a woman that just came and touched him. Not only in the sacrifice did Jesus give of himself, but in healing and in dealing with people, Jesus literally gave of himself. Literally. Why? To help somebody else. To give somebody else a break for once. To give somebody else a better hand of cards, if you will. To see someone that is struggling and say, you know what? I'm going to do something for you. Because I don't want you to always struggle. And so what's the biblical point here? It's not just about giving cash. It's not just about writing the checks. Okay, here, take it. Get out of my face. But brother, it's about caring about people. Giving is about caring. When we talk about doing something for people, it starts with you caring about them. And when we talk about spreading the gospel, when we talk about impacting our culture, caring about people looks like taking interest in who they are and what they're going through. How do you do that? You ask questions. You inquire. And not only that, but you got to root for these people. You see someone, you say, you know what? Talking to a waiter or whatever. Like, do you just want to be a waiter? Or do you want something more out of your life? Do you want to do something else? You know, I'm really passionate about this, and this. I'm going to school for it. Okay, what's your plan for it? What are you thinking? Well, I'm thinking this, and this. You know what? I know somebody in that field. Is it cool if I get them in contact with you? I say that to say this. People know and can feel when you care about them. And sometimes we look at these people as just these NPCs, non-player characters. just the side people in our own personal story. Just randoms. But these are people. And we need to show these people that we care about them. And not just show them, but actually care about these people. And not only that, but we got to root for them. We got to know that they have goals, they have dreams, they want their lives to be good too. And we have to be the people that say, you know what, I want your life to be good too. Well, why? Because that's what God does for us. And if you really think about the quote-unquote logic behind God's love, sometimes it really doesn't make any sense. It really doesn't. Well, why do you love us? We love him because he first loved us. Did we do anything to deserve God's love? No. Then why do we think that we need to go out in the world and say, no, I'm not loving them? What do they do for me? What do we do for God? Absolutely nothing. And so, whenever we see people and we see their humanity and we start to learn and inquire about their story, talk about what's your family life like? What's your dreams? What do you want out of life? What are you thinking? And then we'll start to hear some stories and we'll start to recognize, man, these people are having it pretty rough out here. Talking about broken homes, talking about just overall struggles in life. And it's not just for us to hear those things and that, man, that's tough. But can we not say, how can I help this person? How can I care about this person? It could just be, you know what? It's overwhelming what you just told me. Can I pray for you? And it might just be that. Can I pray for you? And whenever that happens, what you have is you allow God to touch their hearts, in a sense. Because we recognize, look, there is nothing I can do right now to miraculously heal your situation. But at least I can appeal to God and have the faith to know that he hears me and he is looking down on you. You don't think people recognize that? So I encourage us to give to people from ourselves. Give people your heart. Care about people. Think about them. Pray for them. And this is not just strangers. This goes for home too. I confess. This is something I need to get better at. Whenever Paul said in Ephesians chapter 5, The one that loves his wife loves himself. I had to meditate on that for quite some time. Still am. But, brethren, when we love our wives and we inquire about them, first off, I'm just going to say this. If your husband asks you what's wrong, tell him what's wrong. Please don't play this game where nothing. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Don't act. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Tell them what's wrong. If someone asks you that cares about you, hey, what's going on? Just tell them. You don't have to play these games. Wives, same thing. And this goes for not just husband and wife, this is for kids too. Hey, I notice you're little. What's wrong? And actually listen and actually care and actually inquire about these people. These are not just people in your home that, well, can't choose family, so you just gotta live together. No. Can we care about one another in our homes? Can we care about one another in the church? And can we not care about people out in the world? Because these people are having it rough. People in the church too, some people are having it rough. I am very thankful for the situation that I have been given. And I know that there are many scenarios in my life that have turned out very favorably. And I personally do not believe it's because of all my just right decisions. I think I was just born into a certain family. I got certain opportunities, and I try to take advantage of them. And my point in bringing that out is, whenever we're playing cards, not everybody gets 4 aces. Some people get a 2, a 4, and a 5, and a 3. It's like, what am I supposed to do with this? But we have to work with what we got. And so even though we may be, Baker talked about, whenever you start thinking about others and praying for others, that you start to realize that your life is, not as bad as that person. Some people are in a position where they're going through it pretty rough, and they're like, you know what, all these people around here, objectively, I have it worse. But did we ever have it worse in Christ? Did we ever have it worse than what Jesus had to go through in the betrayal of his friends, leading to his death? His other friend, who was right there with him, denying him, who had to get spat on in front of his mother, who was beaten to a bloody pulp by Roman soldiers. We didn't have to go through that. But Jesus died for us so that we can have a better life. He literally gave of himself as he was walking on this earth to people that, of course, Jesus knew, but I'm going to say this for the sake of the argument, strangers. There's a time whenever a widow came out of a city, and Jesus says, don't weep. She went and healed her son, her only son. These are just Jesus walking by. They just came out of the city and just, I'm going to do something for that person. Brethren, we can do that too. And as a matter of fact, I believe we are in a time where kindness is going to be one of the most important things that we can do for people that we don't know. I personally believe, my personal belief, that the world wants to be proven wrong about Christianity. There's a view of Christianity that it's not worth our respect. Why? Because y'all are just a bunch of hypocrites. You just want to go preach to people and not do nothing. Okay, fine, whatever. But whenever you do good for people and your only response is, God's done good for me, I'm going to do good for you. That causes someone to say, you know what, now I cannot say that all Christians are not like that. And then I start to work on the mind, you know what? Christianity provides a better picture in life than non. It provides purpose, it makes sense, it provides guidance, it makes it beautiful, it makes it to where life is actually worth living, not this bleak, gray picture that, oftentimes evolution produces. And whenever someone experiences kindness and the goodness of God and it takes them back, and it makes people's day. When I was working at Chicken Eat, I got like a $3 tip. That made my day. I thought about it. You don't think that your act of kindness, that person's going to go to bed that night and be like, man, I'm thankful for that. And then you begin the process of God working on their minds. but we have to care about people. That's my point. Let's care about people. Let's give our hearts to people. Let's want good for them. Let's root for them. And let's do that for one another. Let's do that in our homes. Let's do that in the world. And I believe God will be pleased. Why? Because that's what Christ did for us. And so we're talking about obedience to the gospel. We're just replicating what God has done for us. Christ was rich. He became poor and sacrificed for us. We don't have to sell all that we have, but we can go without a couple things to do for others. If you have any of the congregation, you can respond. Come as we stand up.